There I was, sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon, both hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, staring out at absolutely nothing. The kids were at school. The house was quiet. And for the first time in what felt like months, I had 45 minutes that belonged entirely to me. Being a single dad is the best and most exhausting thing I have ever done in my life. Every morning is a military operation. Lunches packed, backpacks zipped, shoes on the right feet. Arguments about whose toothbrush, 3 permission slips due yesterday, and I still have to look like a functioning human. So when I get a pocket of silence like that Tuesday afternoon, I treat it like a national holiday. I had driven the kids to school, come home, put the kettle on, and sat down. That was the whole plan. Sit, drink tea, think about nothing, maybe stare at a wall. This was peak relaxation for me at this stage of my life, and I want you to understand that I was completely content with that. No regrets, no feeling like I should be doing something more productive, just a man and his chamomile in a quiet house. Then my phone buzzed. Now normally I ignore my phone during tea time. That is a rule I made for myself. But the notification came from a number I did not recognize, and the preview text said only 4 words. I need your help. I stared at it for a second, took another sip of my tea, and then made the questionable decision to open it. The message was formal, almost old-fashioned in how it was written. It explained that the sender was an elderly woman who lived about 12 minutes from my house in the large property at the end of Birchwood Lane. I knew the place. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the place. It was one of those homes that sat behind iron gates and tall hedges. The kind of house that made you slow down when you drove past it. Nobody really knew who lived there. You just knew that whoever it was had serious money. She introduced herself as Margaret. She said she had come across my name through a mutual acquaintance, someone I had done some landscaping work for a couple of years back. She said she had heard I was reliable, discreet, and not the type to ask unnecessary questions. And then she said she had a request that she needed to discuss in person, and that she would very much appreciate if I could come by that afternoon. I sat with that message for a while. I looked at my tea. I looked at the wall. I thought about how I had exactly 40 minutes of peace left before I had to go pick up my youngest from school. And then I did what any reasonable person would do. I texted back and said I could be there in 20 minutes. When I pulled up to the gate, there was already someone waiting to let me in. A woman in her 30s, professional-looking, who introduced herself as Margaret's assistant. She walked me up a stone path toward the front door without saying much, and when we stepped inside, I remember feeling like I had walked into a different era entirely. The house was filled with antiques, oil paintings, tall bookshelves, and the kind of furniture that makes you afraid to sit down. It smelled like old books and something floral that I could not identify. Margaret was sitting in a high-backed chair near a window when I was brought into the room. She looked to be in her late 80s, small in frame but absolutely commanding in presence. She had sharp eyes that sized me up the moment I walked in, and she gestured to the seat across from her without standing up. She offered me tea, which I found amusing given how my afternoon had started. After a few minutes of what I can only describe as a quiet interview, where she asked me about my work, my children, how long I had lived in the area. She set down her cup and leaned slightly forward. And then she made her request. She said she wanted me to pretend to be her grandson. I blinked. I asked her to say that again. She repeated it without any change in her expression. She had an estranged family, she explained. A son who had not spoken to her in over a decade. Daughters-in-law who had decided she was no longer worth visiting. Grandchildren who only reached out when they needed something. There was a family gathering coming up in 3 weeks, a birthday dinner being organized by her assistant, and Margaret had decided she no longer wanted to walk into that room alone. She did not want me to sign legal documents. She did not want me to pretend for any financial or official purpose. She simply wanted someone to accompany her to this dinner who would sit beside her, call her grandma, and treat her like she actually mattered. She said she would pay me generously for my time, cover any expenses, and arrange childcare for my kids during the hours I would be needed. I want to be honest with you. My first reaction was not sympathy. My first reaction was to look for the exit. This was strange. This was the kind of situation that every rational adult instinct tells you to walk away from. She was an elderly billionaire asking a stranger to perform a family role at what sounded like an already complicated family event. There were about 17 ways this could go sideways. But then she said something that stopped me from making my excuses. She said that she had watched me at the school pickup line once, a few weeks prior. She said she had been in the car with her assistant and had noticed how I interacted with my children when they ran out of school. She said I had crouched down to their level to hear what they were saying instead of just waiting for them to finish. She said she had not seen someone do that in a very long time, in her family at least. And she thought that a man like that would understand what it meant to simply make another person feel seen. I did not say anything for what felt like a full minute. I thought about my own kids. I thought about how I would feel if decades from now, after everything I had poured into raising them, they stopped calling. I thought about sitting in a big house alone and having to text a stranger because you needed someone to sit next to you at a dinner table. I thought about pride and loneliness, and how the two can exist inside the same person at exactly the same time. I told her I needed to think about it. She nodded like she had expected that answer. She handed me a card with a number on it and said I could take as many days as I needed, but that she hoped I would say yes. When I stood to leave, she did not get up. But she did say one more thing. She said she was not looking for pity, and she was not asking me to lie about anything that mattered. She just wanted to feel for one evening like she had not completely lost everything. I drove home. I picked up my kids. I made dinner, helped with homework, ran baths, read 2 bedtime stories, and sat back down at that same kitchen table with a second cup of chamomile tea after they were asleep. And I thought about it for a long time. What I realized that night, sitting in my quiet house after another full day of giving everything I had to 2 small people who needed me, was that loneliness does not care how much money you have. Margaret had a compound, an assistant, iron gates, oil paintings on every wall, and she was asking a stranger for one evening of human warmth. That is not a story about wealth. That is a story about what happens when connection breaks down inside a family and nobody bothers to fix it. I called the number on the card the next morning. I told her yes. I want to share more of what happened at that dinner because what unfolded was something I genuinely was not prepared for. The family dynamics in that room were unlike anything I had ever witnessed. And something happened toward the end of the evening that changed the way I think about estrangement, forgiveness, and what it means to show up for someone, even when the story is not yours. If you want to hear the rest of this, stick around, because it gets much more complicated before it gets better. And I think some of you are going to recognize parts of this story in your own families. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the follow-up. The next part goes up this week.